Hello and welcome. The movie starts with a man talking about the prophecy of a promised one that will deliver the people of God through salvation and give them the promised land from the hands of the Philistines. And then the scene changes into a temple in Gaza, where the priest in the temple was saying about how weak the Hebrews are and how they easily gave their harvest to their god Dagon. Unbeknown to them, there are two brothers who are sneakily stealing the food that is stored in the temple's storage. They did it by lowering a rope from the surface to the temple's underground storage. There we meet the two brothers, Caleb, who is being lowered through the floor, and Samson, who is holding the rope. After gathering 2 baskets of food, they caught the attention of a passing guards who asks them who they were. Samson told him that he is waiting for his master who is praying in the temple. One of the guards asks him to remove his hood and show his face. When they saw his face, one of the guards recognized him and told his fellow guards that he is Samson, one of the strong one on the fighting pit. With no way out, Samson let go off the rope and threw the cart to the advancing guards, and jumped down to where his brother was. Then they proceed inside the temple where the priest was preaching. When he saw them, he ordered for them to be caught, but they easily outwitted the temple guards. To create a distraction, Samson takes some coins in the temple's coffers and throw it to the people inside the temple. And then they ran outside. Because of the commotion and miscommunication, the two brothers got separated, and Samson ended up fighting the guards who caught up with him. When the two reunited, Samson got bewildered, because his brother is wearing a woman's shawl to disguise himself, in which Caleb advised Samson not to tell anyone on what he did. Meanwhile, in a village in the tribe of Dan, some Philistine soldiers are busy collecting the tribute from the villagers, leaving them with nothing. This is Samson's village, in which we saw 2 old people, Manoah, Samson's father, and his wife, who are wondering where Samson went. Because of the possibilities of hunger, one of the head of the family, Tobias, begs the prince, Rala, if he could show them some mercy. And then the prince asks Tobias on what form of mercy he should give. Tobias said that maybe they could lower the tributes. And then the prince told the other Hebrews that Tobias will never go hungry again and proceed to order the man behind Tobias to kill him, and then he asks the people if anyone else desires mercy, on which no one replied. When Samson and Caleb return home, their parents told them that Tobias is killed by the Philistine prince, and in which they reminded Samson that he is a chosen one and was gifted by God to deliver his people from the hands of the Philistines. They also said that the council thinks that it is times to anoint a judge, in which Samson replied that they do not need a judge, what they need is peace. Furthermore, his father told him to remember the prophecy that Samson is chosen by the living God to exact his vengeance, and that it is God's will, but he told him that it is not his will. Samson also tells them that he did everything that God requires of him: no wine, touching of the dead, or cutting his hair. And yet they did not have peace. On the Gaza palace, King Balak and his son Prince Rala are conversing about the tributes. Prince Rala told his father about a certain Hebrew with great strength and that the Hebrews believe that he is their savior. The king told his son that it is only a story for the slave, but the king still asks his son to investigate the rumors and quell it. In which the prince hesitates, because he thinks that it is a waste of time. But King Balak ordered him not as a father, but as a king, and that he must be followed. One day while Samson and his brother were walking, they heard about a Philistine fighter who brags himself that he is unbeatable and mocks their God. He also taunted them that he is like fighting children and they must send 2 people to defeat him. Samson was intrigued, but Caleb thinks that they brought this fighter here to draw out Samson. After defeating his 2 opponents, the Philistine continued mocking the Hebrews, telling them that they are weak, and that they serve an even weaker God. And then Samson challenged the fighter, on which he also taunted to make the bettings to 2 bags of silver, if they have great faith to their God. Before the fight was started, Samson was distracted by a beautiful girl, on which he receives a few beatings from his opponents. Caleb asks his brother if he is all right, but Samson jokingly said that he will be all right if he knows the name of the beautiful girl. And then Samson asks his God to lend him strength, on which he uses to knock his opponent down, and then Samson picks up a huge boulder and ready to kill his opponent with it, but his opponent yielded, and he spares his life. On the way to their home, the beautiful girl and his father was ambushed by the prince's soldiers, killing the fighter and taking the father and daughter. On the palace, the prince reported to the king that Samson is like a god in flesh. But the king reminded his son that his kingdom is not of gods and that gods were only symbols and have no power to the common man. And he advises his son to kill the spark before it became a huge fire. Back to the village, Caleb told his brother that Tara was the name of the beautiful girl he meets and was Prince Rala's slave. So Samson decides to meet her, and he followed her to a grain silo in the city. There he observes her crying and asks her if everything is all right, on which she questioned him if he's been spying on her. Samson told him that the first time they meet his head was spinning, not because of the punch he receives but because he was distracted by her, in which she smiles. Before leaving, he asks her to meet him at a cliff by the beach, where the path from Gaza meets the sea. The next day, Samson and Tara meets on the beach. Tara asks Samson if he believes on destiny, in which he replied yes. But Tara told him that she did not and refuses to be bound by any kind of slavery. Our lives are our own, our destiny is what we make of it, she says. She also told him that her mother died when she is still young, and his father was imprisoned by the prince. Samson shares his destiny to her, on which his people expect him to be their savior. After thinking that they share a lot of things, they also share a kiss. Meanwhile, the prince is so agitated thinking that he should be leading an army in Egypt or Syria instead of observing the Hebrews. He also thinks that he is a better king than his father. On the other hand, Samson asked Tara to marry him, but she says that his parents will not agree to it, on which he replied that he will not stop at nothing until he gets their blessings. On the same night, Samson told his parents about his plan, on which they asked the name of the girl. He said that her name is Tara, a Philistine, and a prisoner to the crown. When his parents heard what kind of girl Samson is planning to marry, they were disappointed, because to them people outside from the tribe is an enemy. They further say that he will bring horror and shame to their family if he insists on marrying her. Disappointed, Samson runs aimlessly outside, calling to God if what does he want from him. He also asks if he was meant to lead his people. If it was, then he asks for a sign. As if receiving an answer, a lion suddenly appeared near him and pounced on him. Nearing death, he asks God for his forgiveness and strength, which the latter give him, on which he used to break the lion's neck. Back to the prince's castle, Tara was singing happily, when her master entered the room and asks her to stop. She then asks Tara why she is so happy. She replied that it is because of Samson. When her master heard the name of his lover, she thinks that he's familiar. And she told Tara that maybe she can convince the prince to let Tara be with Samson. Later that night, the prince is having a conversation with one of the generals, on which they are talking about some news, that the Hebrews is making Samson as their judge. Then the prince's wife told him that his servant girl, Tara, is planning to marry Samson. The general vehemently said that it is a blasphemy against Dagon and cannot be allowed. But the prince's wife reminded his husband that if he let them marry, then Samson would be on his debt, and will not rise against him. The prince was delighted on this plan, so he let the wedding take place. While on plains, the same place the lion was killed, Samson discovered a beehive with honey inside the rotting body of the lion. On which he composed a riddle: out of the eater, something to eat, out of the strong something, sweet. At the wedding banquet, while the people are dancing, the prince approached Samson and asks him to drink, on which he replied that he doesn't drink wine. And then the prince challenged Samson on a riddle. The prince first asks, "At night I come without being caught, by the day I am lost without stolen, what am I?" Samson was not able to answer it, on which the prince says that star is the answer. At Samson's turn, he bragged that he has a riddle that the prince and his men cannot answer. He also told them that if they cannot answer his riddle, then they should give him 30 tunics as a wager. But if they guessed correctly, then Samson will also give them the same tunics or lose his head or that of his wife. Then Samson told them the riddle: out of the eater, something to eat, out of the strong, something sweet, and gave them until morning to solve the riddle. Incensed, the prince asks Tara secretly on what the answer of her husband's riddle is. On which she replied that she didn't know. The prince then threatens her with the life of her father, which is on prison. Having no choice, Tara asks his husband about the answer to his riddle, but he told her that tomorrow she will know the answer. Bothered by the prince's threat, Tara was not in the mood, and this was noticed by her husband. He asks what the problem is. On which she replied that as a husband and wife, there should be no secrets between them. Troubled, he told her that the answer of the riddle is honey and lion. Unbeknown to them, the prince's wife is hidden below and heard all their conversation. On the morning, Samson was surprised when the prince correctly answered his riddle. Then the prince asks him of their wager, 30 tunics or that of his wife's head. Having no choice, he runs outside while his wife is saying that she didn't tell anybody about the answer. Having running for a while, Samson stumbled upon a well, where he drinks eagerly. Beside that well was an army of Philistines. Then Samson asks them to give him their tunics. Hearing Samson's requests, the soldiers' leaders were enraged and attacked him, but Samson grabbed his sword and killed him with a single punch. Seeing that their leader was killed, the other soldiers pounced on Samson, but he killed them using only his fists. Having acquired his tunics, he returned to the prince's place, asking for his wife. Seeing the tunics that resembled that of his men, the prince told Samson that he has no wife because according to Dagon's law, once the wedding ceremony begun, the groom and bride must be together to complete the vows. The prince added that, since he killed his soldiers, then Samson must spend his life working on a mine and ordered for his arrest. Disheartened, Samson quickly escaped, while the soldiers are pursuing him. While resting, he noticed a fox and followed it to its cave, where he found many other of its kind. Thinking of revenge, Samson captured the foxes and tied burning clothes to their tails. He then releases them on the crops outside the prince's palace. Seeing the destruction, the prince asks on what is happening. Outside, Samson demands the release of his wife, and he will stop damaging the crops. The prince then brought Tara and his father into the battlements, but instead of giving them to Samson, he throws them below, killing them from the fall and the fire. On the morning, the prince visits Samson's village and asks if where he is. He threatens that if Samson did not show up, then he will kill his father and raze the village. His brother Caleb then proceeds to look for Samson on the fox cave. There he told him that God is not done with him and told him that he had a dream on which God spoke to him saying that his brother will free his people. But Samson did not want to fight, so he let his people capture him in exchange for the release of his father. Then they brought him to the prince. The beheader forced Samson to kneel. Then the prince approached him and says that before he kills him, his village will burn and his father will be killed. Betrayed, Samson rips the ropes that bind him and smacked the prince to his face. He then prayed to God for strength while the army surrounds him. The prince was so angry when he realized that Samson hits him and ordered all his men to bring Samson's head to him. Samson continuously asked strength from God by saying, "Lord, I'm your humble servant, do not abandon me now, be my strength, be my strength." Empowered, he killed all the soldiers alone with a donkey's jaw as his weapon. The Hebrews then anoint Samson as their judge. On the other hand, the prince told the king that Samson has the strength of God. But the king replied that his eyes deceived him, and if Samson bleeds, then he is no god. He then tells his son that he will not retaliate if Samson ends his violence. Enraged, the prince smashed Dagon's idol, saying that he is not a god and fears Samson's power, that's why he will take Samson's power for himself. But before he could do anything, he was sent by his father in war campaign to Egypt. After a few years, the situation of the Hebrews did not improve, and yet they did not retaliate. Samson chose peace. He thinks that war will only bring suffering to his people, and will try to negotiate with King Balak for freedom. He also promised that he will not return until he gets their freedom. On the king's court, Samson asks the king for a true peace between their people. And the king must reduce the tribute of the Hebrews, or he will face the wrath of God. The king did not agree. He will only agree to reduce their tribute if Samson will disappear from his people. He gave Samson a choice: stay and watch your people die, or go away and have them flourish. Samson then told his fellow tribe member that he will not return to his tribe and that he will stay on the city. Before he could leave, he was approached by a woman, who asks him to stay on her inn. At night, a woman told him that he must speak with him, warning him that his life is in danger. Samson recognized the woman as the prince's wife, but she told him that he already left the prince because of his evil doings. She continued that the people know that he is here, and they are laying a trap for him. Samson did not believe her and thinks that the prince told her to do so. But she insists that she did not lie and told him about Tara and how she envied her having found true love. They then runs outside, where the people are looking for them everywhere. Hidden for a while, the woman told him that if they escaped the city then they should meet at her house on Belsham at the valley of Shurich. Samson then lured the mobs to him. Cornered on the gate, Samson then asked God for strength and protection. Having received God's aid, Samson then pushed the gate mightily. He also tells God to let the people witness the strength of the living God. The people were bewildered looking at the figure who was carrying the heavy gate. Exhausted, Samson collapsed. Not long after, the woman who told him to escape arrives and brought him to her house. There he dreamed about Tara his wife, but was startled when he saw that of the other woman. Samson was confused on why she is helping him, considering that they were enemies. He also told that he is leaving, but she insists that he stays until his wounds are healed. Before leaving, Samson asked her on what her name is, on which she said that she is Delilah. On the other hand, the Hebrews, at last, are planning to retaliate to their oppressor. Caleb asks Samson to join them, but he says that he will not lead them to their deaths. Samson then returns to Delilah's house. She asks Samson if he could leave behind everything. Where would he go? Samson told her that maybe Goshen, or Egypt, to see the cities of Joseph. But Delilah says that no one could bind him, but Samson says that maybe there is, and proceeded to kiss her. At the market, the prince met Delilah and reminded her that she was at his clutch, and they must finish what they have started. One day, Samson noticed that Delilah is troubled and asks what's happened. She told him that he keeps things from her and refused to share his innermost secrets to her. Samson asks what secrets? And then she asks where does his strength come from? Samson then told her that he is a Nazarene and keeps 3 vows: no wine, no touching of the dead, and no cutting of his hair. And if ever he cut his hair, then his strength will leave him. At night, Delilah put a sleeping powder to Samson's drink. Deep on sleep, she then cuts his hair. Then with Delilah's signal, Prince Rala and his men surround him. With his hair cut, Samson has no power to resist. In revenge, the prince heated his sword and gouged Samson's eyes, blinding him. They then brought him to dungeon. There the prince asks Samson on where his strength came from. He told him that his strength comes from God. King Balak asks his son on why he did not bring Samson's head to him. The prince says that they must humiliate Samson, that they triumph over his God, and when other nations heard this they will be glorified. The king was angry, telling his son that he is an imbecile and knows nothing. Feeling wronged, the prince then stabs his father, killing his father and making him king. At the dungeon, Samson told Caleb that God did not abandon him and that even when he is in this jail, he still hears God's voice. Then Samson prays, "My strength is now your strength, my eyes yours. You have called me for mirth and now I listen. What would you have me do?" At the temple, the new king boasts that he is mighty and he has the power of his god Dagon, for he subjugated even the strongest man. He then brought Samson to the temple, where the people are cursing him. Samson then was hanged with his hand and whipped. The torturer then cut the rope that hanged him. Samson then asks God for his strength one last time and die with the Philistines. God heard him with thunder and lightnings as sign, and he rips the ropes that bind his hands and steadily climbed to his feet. Seeing the familiar scene, the new king was terrified and asks the soldiers to kill Samson immediately. But before they could do anything, Samson planted his arms on the building's pillars, pushing it aside, making the building collapse along with the Philistines inside.